More and more people in 2025 and beyond are either deciding to not be a parent or they're pushing the choice back further and further. I live in New York City, where many people either forgo having children or delay having children for their career or new experiences. While I've been weighing this decision for myself, I wanted to do a deep dive in case it could be helpful for someone else as well, where I examine this question of what it's like to choose to be a parent now in the modern world through the lens of economics, philosophy, sociology, history, and you won't just hear from me and my struggles weighing the pros and cons on this topic. You will also hear from experts and research that we're looking into, and we'll hear from a guest, a friend of mine who was raised in a very different part of the country. Hello, and welcome to Immersion, 30 minutes beneath the surface. Let's start this off with a personal story from the gynecologist, like all good podcasts start. I was sitting there after we did the main part of the appointment, and I wanted to ask about different options, testing, fertility, because I'm in my 30s and I'm not sure about having children. And he cut me off and said, "Do you have a partner?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, well, you all need to grow up and decide if you want kids or not. It's not that complicated. They're not hard. All they need is love." This is what got me thinking about shooting this episode, because a couple people that are in that generation, maybe around 60 years old, have made me feel that way as I've been weighing the pros and cons of being a mother or not in this day and age. And I think there's a slight grain of truth to it. That's what got me thinking about this episode, because for hundreds, thousands of years, I think people just had kids. They didn't really question it so much. And now many people are, like me, fence sitters for years. But the world is a lot more complicated now. And we also have a lot more options now. So the wonder of the week is specifically, is our generation overcomplicating this, or is our world simply more complicated? It's a bit of a faulty question to begin with. A lot of people, and women specifically, didn't really have a say in how many children they were having, from lack of birth control to not even having a say to what happened to their bodies in certain marriages, to societal norms, not having career opportunities, and then also requiring more children to help them in certain settings, like on farms. For so many factors, it wasn't a decision of if they were going to have kids or not, or how many they had. So then that also made me realize how much privilege I even have to be able to make this choice. And there's a lot of women in many parts of the world and country who don't have those choices today. We're going to be hitting on a lot of complicated truths as we go through this episode. For instance, on one hand, we have the ability to make this choice. And then on the other hand, we have these existential thoughts about if we're making the right choice and questioning it. A way to summarize this pretty well is that we're the first generation to choose to opt into parenthood. For a lot of human history, it was a radical choice to opt out, but it was assumed you'd do it. Now, it's just very open, and you could just keep living your life, or you could choose to opt into parenthood. So that's a very different decision and paradigm and way of looking at it. So for people that are feeling conflicted, let's examine some reasons why it's a complicated decision in this day and age. One is environmental impact. This is something that people are becoming more and more aware of. Within that, some people are nervous about having kids, unsure about what this earth will even look like when it comes to weather, how livable it'll be in another 50 years. My guess is in the Depression, in tons of other times in history, people were unsure about bringing a child into this world. And people did it anyway. And I'm really grateful to exist, even if my parents had doubts about it. So I don't think that's a reason that one should definitely not have kids, but I also think it's an understandable reason if someone were to choose to not have kids. Another consideration is maternal healthcare. So we've come a long way with maternal advancements and support for pregnancy globally, but there are still other considerations. For example, higher maternal mortality rates for Black women is still something our society needs to be working on. So it's not just assumed that it's safe to have a child now and give birth, even though statistics on that as a whole have been improving. They have not improved enough for all populations. Another area is weighing the cost of giving up other alternatives. So now people have more options with their careers. They have more options with what to do in their free time. They might have more interests. I was looking into this, and in 1885, you might play music in the evening or read a book, but there wasn't that much you could do. Whereas now someone could technically, barring the environmental impacts that we just talked about, you could go to Paris tomorrow if money was no object. You could watch Netflix all night. You could change the world through some business that you start or a cause that you want to dedicate yourself to, or you could just get really, really into basically any hobby. There is so much optionality now. So the opportunity cost of giving up all of that free time, energy, resources to have a child is greater now compared to in the past when there just was less you could do. And while one is weighing the options, the cost of having a child in some ways has gone up, not just economically, but energetically. We need to talk about how the job description of parenting itself has changed. Sociologist Annette Leroux actually coined a term for this. She calls it the shift from natural growth to concerted cultivation. In the past, the model was natural growth. You loved your kids, you fed them, you sent them outside to play with a stick or sit on the floor with a wooden spoon while you cooked dinner. The assumption was, if I provide the basics, they will grow. Today, the model is concerted cultivation. We view the child not just as a person to be raised, but as a project to be optimized. Currently, in a lot of places, such as the US, we feel this intense pressure to constantly cultivate children. Are we reading enough? Is their attachment style secure? Is the toy Montessori aligned? And while there are benefits to this, it's also really taxing on the parents, and I even saw in some places, sometimes the children. According to the Pew Research Center, mothers today spend significantly more time on direct childcare than mothers in the 1960s, even though far more of us are working full-time jobs. And for the dads listening, dads today have tripled the amount of time that they spend on childcare compared to 1965. So if you feel tired, whether you're a parent or are contemplating being a parent and want to make sure you do it right, and it just looks exhausting, it's not just you. The expectations for everyone have changed massively in the last couple decades. We always hear it takes a village, but when was the last time that our society was really living in villages? A long time ago. And to go even further on that note, many people don't even live near relatives anymore. Our extended family often moves away, or we do. So many people have to end up paying for childcare, which can be so expensive, something we're also going to get into later in the economic section.
Another aspect that's different now is modern complexity. Not having a village to rely on, like we talked about, adds logistical complexity because childcare isn't distributed anymore. But just existing in the modern era, with or without kids, is more complex than the world our ancestors lived in. They weren't navigating red tape with insurance plans. They weren't trying to decode the fine print on a 30-year mortgage or understand complex tax law once a year. They weren't wondering if they should get a VPN or if they're saving enough for retirement. And look, while working on a farm in 1890 was without a doubt a harder existence physically than the jobs that many Americans work now, even that trade-off comes with some new complexities. For example, how do you make time for movement, a gym routine to live a long and healthy life after a 9 to 6 desk job plus commute? And even if you are fortunate enough to have the time, you feel like you have to research the optimal routine to follow. The amount of news and information we're exposed to in a single day would blow our ancestors' minds, not to mention trying to make sense of the conflicting information we're constantly seeing. Now, I know with more examples I list, people might just say, who cares? Get over yourself and just raise a family. But that misses the point. The point is that we've traded physical exhaustion for mental exhaustion. And for many people, their brains feel like they're already at capacity. So the idea of becoming a project manager for a tiny human feels impossible. I'm actually planning to do a deep dive on this idea sometime, how for thousands of years, humans lived in a world that was largely similar to their ancestors. Then suddenly we had rapid change that our minds and bodies are struggling to catch up with. And so while some people may say,
well, it's natural to have kids, it's like we do not live in a very natural world in a lot of ways. And we are living longer too. When the average age of life expectancy was shorter, making a decision that lasts your entire life feels a little bit less weighty. It feels like less of a big decision. But if you have the possibility, and there is a real possibility that you'll live to 90, 100, who knows how long with certain advancements in health, this is a big decision. Not everyone becomes independent at 18. And even for people that do become independent, a parent always feels like a parent. They always feel responsible for their child. This is probably one of the top 3 decisions people will make. I mean, it's definitely in the top 3, but who you marry or partner up with, if you marry, all of that would be one. Another big decision would be what career path to choose. And then if you have kids / how many kids. It's the only permanent decision of those because you can change your career or people get divorced. So it is probably the biggest decision you'll ever make, which you're going to hear me going back to this a lot. I think goes back to the idea that I don't think that we're overthinking it. Granted, part of the point of this podcast is that I think a lot and I want to air it out. And so I'm sure a lot of people would say that we are overthinking it, but I don't think we are. And I want to validate your point of view if you feel the weight of this decision weighing on you and you want a space to kind of pull apart these different threads. I spent a long time thinking about this decision. When I was younger, I thought I wanted 4 kids because I love the feeling of being around a lot of people and community. Then it swung to 0, then 2, 1, to undecided. It's something I've never really felt sure on. And there's a lot that I have felt sure on in my life. So I know what it feels like to feel certain of my intuition or gut instincts on a certain thing. But this just isn't an area where I had that gut instinct kick in one way or the other. So for a couple years, because I'm getting to that age where I need to be thinking about this, I kept a journal. Anytime I read something that resonated on one way or the other, or just had a really strong feeling, or saw something that I observed that pushed the needle one way or the other, I wrote it down. And I had a pretty long list in Apple Notes in my phone. Lately, the decision felt even a bit more pressing. And I took all of those journal notes and I put them in what my partner and I called a pro list. Pro and pro, not pro and con, because it might be cheesy, but it made the process a little bit less daunting and reminds us of the fact that there are benefits to each path. The first thing I realized when making this list is that, well, I'm going to say pro-con list just because that's a more known term, but pro-con lists for this kind of decision are actually pretty silly. And I think that most people know that. But you immediately realize that you could have all the cons in the world. Messy house, getting sick more often, less sleep, less time for yourself, all of these things. But then one pro of just wanting them could outweigh all of those cons. So the number on each side of the list doesn't matter. What I then did was I color-coded and made the only points that moved the needle either way a certain color to make them pop out. And then the area where I learned the most, and something that I hope can help you if you're weighing this decision, or actually would even help if you've already made the decision, is I made a third column, which was, irregardless of the choice, this is how I want to live my life. And I think that's actually what made me realize that I can be happy either way. I can have a fulfilled life either way. Is I realized, for instance, community came up on both sides of the list. On one side, maybe it's baked in community that's a very intimate small circle, like family game nights and family dinners. And on the other side of the list, it's some of the ties might not be as close, but there's more of them. For instance, community theaters, community gardens, group friend game nights, and book clubs, and maybe knowing my neighbors a bit better or having closer friends. Now, going to community on the other side. I think a lot of people have a more simple or easy baked in community if they have kids, because you maybe just enroll them in soccer and then suddenly you're friends with all the other soccer parents and seeing them every Saturday. So there's routine. Versus it takes a little bit more conscious effort to join all these other things for yourself versus, oh, I just happen to see all these people in the neighborhood. We go trick-or-treating together. We do this stuff because our kids do it. So one of them is a built-in kind of automatic community that still has a lot of effort. And being a parent is the harder path in a lot of ways. But the point is that in the third column was just wanting community. And I can have that either way. I won't bore you with each area of making these realizations, but what I kept coming back to is that I just want a full life. And we're going to get to later in the episode what a full life might mean to different people, because it's going to look different to everyone. And that's why it's a question that can kick up so many things for people, is because what is a full life to them can look really different. And when someone's living a life that's completely opposite theirs, it can almost make them wonder, like, how are you happy living a life that is so different from my own? So looping back here, the realization with that pro list is that either path could be fulfilling. What mattered more was how I walked that path. And like so many things in life, it's what we do after the decision, how we live our life, that matters most. Now this brings up the elephant in the room of selfishness. I don't usually feel selfish for not having kids at this point in my life because I feel comfortable contributing in different ways. I did feel selfish making this list because all of the topics, pro, either one, they all had to do with me. Part of the reason I was pumping the brakes on having kids, at least now, is because, again, I wasn't thinking about this child's life and how they would feel entering this world and what impact I might have on them. I was thinking about, do I want kids? Do I want kids? It was all about me. And that, I think, is selfish. But just to help destigmatize this, because there is this deep-seated bias that having kids equals selfless and not having kids equals selfish. I even remember one day going for a walk around the neighborhood in my first neighborhood that I was raised in. And okay, my dad is amazing. This isn't to be critical of him. I think it's just to show how much this is like ingrained in our society. I remember him pointing to this really big kind of fancy house, and he said, those people are selfish. They don't have kids. It's just that direct. I think now it's a lot more indirect. I do think also, though, a lot of it was the time. This was a long time ago. Sorry, I'm laughing because my dad usually wouldn't say things that are that blunt, but I think it just shows a belief that can be held in society. So to kind of debunk this a bit, let's say someone chooses not to have kids for the sake of their career or more sleep. By choosing not to bring a child into this world that you can't give enough of yourself to feel like you can give them a good life, isn't that actually an act of responsibility? And if we were to flip the question and, someone just had a kid to carry on the family name or to care for that person when they're older, is that really selfless? If someone is someone that wants to give back to the world in ways, there's never, I think, been a way to do that more easily than there is today, between the internet and more information and more organizations to get involved with and ways to donate money or time. So we can expand what it means to be a nurturer. Maybe someone is a nurturer to the world as a mentor, a teacher, an aunt or uncle, being the friend that can actually take the call at 2 a.m. because they're not overloaded with caring for their own child. So nurturing is a human trait. It is not just a biological trait for our biological families exclusively. And if this is part that's been weighing on you, if you feel selfish, just know that there are thousands of ways that you can give to the world, and that the world needs what you have to give if it's something that you want to do. But I think a lot of people would argue that it's not your responsibility. And again, that is where we'll put this to the side for another philosophical discussion. So as we close out our dive section, this is not just about whether you will have 1 kid or 3, or back in 1900, 11. It is the question as to how many are you going to end up having. And so for a lot of people, there is a really large growing population that is starting to have 1 kid, the one and done group, because in a way, they feel like they're having it all. They don't have the overwhelm or complexity that multiple kids brings, but they get to experience being a parent. So for many people, it's not the choice of whether they're going to have kids or not. It's whether they're going to have a child or not. Welcome to The Exploration, where we dive into research, statistics. We hear from a guest if we're having on that week. So it's a little bit more of a broad view versus my initial insights. So the first thing we need to look at here is birth rates and trends overall. Are more people having less children? And as you likely know, it really depends on what region of the world we're looking at. And a lot of this depends on where a country is at in the demographic transition. That could be a topic for another episode or just something you can read about. I can link something on it below as well. If a country has more access to birth control, if women are more educated, if death rates are lower, there are many factors that can lower the birth rate for a population. And a lot of this comes with progress. So it's not a bad thing. I think a lot of people would tell us that all declines in population for a country are bad, but it really depends on different people's interests. We can touch a little bit on that in the footnotes. Even apart from this natural transition, there have been ups and downs in history. Just to even give you a look over the past 100 years, I linked a resource down below that zooms out and shows birth rates going down in the earlier part of the 1900s. And then, of course, the baby boom after World War II. A lot of people started having children, and then birth rates going down again later. So I think the way the public talks about it, it could almost sound like birth rates were always high and then now suddenly they're going down for the first time ever. And maybe it's happening in more places in an unprecedented way. The information that we're looking at is limited. It's more recent that we have real concrete data to look at. If we start to go back several hundred years ago, we're piecing together information from the records we have, such as church records of baptisms, marriages, and then they're trying to put together clues to understand birth rates. So it's only more recent that we even have this concrete data to look at. And all of this is to say that birth rates have gone up and down at a lot of different points in history. So even certain periods where people were waiting a little bit longer to get married or like marriage trends changed, of course, that's going to change birth rates as well. And historically, society has tracked this for women, but we know that this is a human question. You might be a man watching or listening, and this really affects men too. In fact, data suggests that men are more likely to not have children than women. And this is not always by choice. For instance, sometimes by the time a man feels socially and financially ready to have a child, that window has passed. So while I'm referring to women a lot in this episode, well, that's just because of two reasons. One, of course, this decision impacts women more. I also think it's on women's mind more. I think that women are pressured more. And a lot of the data, again, is on female birth rates, but there are a lot of men who stick around and become amazing fathers, and the decision to become a parent really weighs on them too. This is not to imply that this only impacts women at all. It's definitely a human question. All right, now getting into the economics of it all. Economic considerations in 2025. And we are referring to, in this specific section, the state of the economy in the United States. I know I've been bouncing around and talking about different regions for different parts, but it would be a little bit complex to look at the economy everywhere. Just a little bit complex, though. So, okay. One consideration is that the cost of buying a house and childcare has increased more than wages have increased. For instance, some data that I'm looking at says in 1980, the median home price was 3.5 times median income, whereas in 2024, 2025, it is over 7 times the median wage. And that generation that is in their 60s, that is telling us that we are maybe lazy for not having kids, or we're thinking it through too much, they probably don't feel the same weight of not being able to afford a house. And again, we're living longer, so retirement is really a consideration. The fact that tuition is just not affordable, and they might be thinking, well, like, I want to do right by my child. I want to be able to help pay for some of their college education, but I'm barely getting out of student loan debt myself. It is a really different time where things are not affordable in the same way. Going to childcare, a lot of times, even if one parent still works, because it really might take 2 parents' income to be able to support a family, basically all of one parent's income might be going to childcare. That's how expensive it is. So then you wonder if you should even be working at all, but it feels unaffordable to not have 2 parents working. So a lot of people feel really in a bind. This is where I really want to allow just some space to, again, feel the weight of this decision in relation to the economy, because there's a lot of people that would have kids if they feel like they could afford them. It's a lot to consider. The middle class is most affected by this. There's actually a U-shaped curve when it comes to having kids. The low income and high income families are having kids at a higher rate compared to the middle class, which is more affected by this. The middle income families don't qualify for some of the benefits that low income families qualify for, but they also can't afford a nanny or some of the daycare services that the high income families have when they have to work and can't just stay home with their kids. They're also the part of the population that is trying to keep up. But I think the middle class often thinks, well, like, I don't have the money to do it the way I'm seeing other people do it, maybe online or in their neighborhood. So they just don't have kids. Now, I don't want to make this sound like it was an easy choice for older generations. For instance, baby boomers and some of Gen X was pushed out of the workplace if they had kids because there weren't as many childcare options. So again, this is another way where we have more options now, but they're not necessarily all great options. We just simply have more choices. And going back to student loans, while some data may suggest lower student loan balances, depends on how you look at the data. From what I was seeing, there are less borrowers, but there is a higher balance from people that borrow. So if you have crushing student loan debt, you're probably not going to have a kid. All of this is to say that often being in the middle class right now leaves no margin for error. I do see some people not having kids and then maybe they'll end up traveling. But again, the cost of going to Europe once a year might be a few $1,000s.
And I think the most recent data that I saw on this said that it costs now an average of about $21,000 to $23,000 a year to raise a kid in the United States. This is up from $17,000, which used to be the number that was stated a lot. However, due to inflation, that has gone up.
But it really depends. There are some people that are spending way more than that, and there's some people that are spending way less than that. It also depends on how you raise that child, which again goes back to our point from earlier, is it's what you do after the decision that makes the biggest impact. And just to close out the economic section with a more personal note, my partner and I, we had some career changes in our later 20s. We took some pretty abrupt pivots, and then it took us a little bit longer to get our footing compared to some of our peers. So for a lot of people that didn't know exactly what they wanted to do at 22, it took them a little bit of time to get settled, then that can really impact this decision later. And then there's a lot of fear mongering out there where women are told that there's this steep drop off at 35, which turns out it's not a steep drop off right at 35. I can link some resources down below on that. But there are certain biological truths and facts, something that we'll also get into later in the episode. So they're weighing trying to get set up financially versus also trying not to delay too long. And it's, again, not just women. For women, there is a steeper drop off, but for men, I am seeing more out there about paternal age and certain health outcomes. So it's something that everybody's also weighing. And even apart from that, some people are wondering, do I have the energy to be an older parent? And do I want to be a parent if I'm at a certain age? However, just one other interesting data on this is while we are seeing, I think in America, I'm sure other countries as well, but particularly in America, if we look at these different ages, birth rates are going down for every single group, except for, I think, maybe 40 to 44, like that range or something like that. I'll link the correct one down below as well in the show notes. But for that group, it's the only group where the population of mothers is going up. And that is because of new technologies such as IVF, which again, not everybody can afford. And it's not always successful anyway. So there's a whole other factor weighing on people's mind. It's time. Due to the complexity of this topic, we have split this episode into 2 parts. In part 2, we cover regret, and I also get into societal pressures to have children with my friend Madeline. We also have action steps and ways you can make a lot of the things we've talked about applicable. We released this on the same day, so it is available wherever you are listening to part 1 right now, whether that's on YouTube or a different podcast player. It's linked down below as well. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you there.